All right, I'm just going to give everyone a few minutes to join in while we're getting started here. Got started just a minute early, so I want to make sure everyone has a chance to join before we start sharing content here. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Hope everyone's having a wonderful Wednesday.
Some people eating lunch, maybe.
Yes. Just another minute here before we dive in. Let people get in the room. We do have a lot to cover today, a lot of insights to share with you. So I don't want to take too much longer, but I'd love to welcome you to our annual Pursuant Giving Outlook webinar. Our theme this year is Remaining Your Donor's Charity of Choice. And we do have a lot to cover, so let's dive right in. First, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded. So if you do need to leave or if you miss something, just look in your inbox for the replay and the slide deck shortly after we wrap up. We also hope to have a brief Q&A at the end if time allows. So use the Q&A button located in your bottom navigation to ask questions. If we do not get to them all, please enter your questions and we'll do our best to answer them after the webinar. And as a fundraising and marketing agency exclusively serving the nonprofit sector, Pursuant develops and deploys strategies to improve results. We're grounded in analytics and powered by GivingDNA, a next generation donor engagement platform. And we extend your impact by allowing more people to experience the joy of giving. We're really excited to welcome you today. Joining us as our main presenter, Matthew Mielcarek. He is the Senior Vice President of Insights and Analytics here at Pursuant. And my name is Megan, and I'll also be joining and facilitating the conversation. Matthew, you ready to dive right in?
I am. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Megan. We are going to turn our video off so you can focus on our content, but we really appreciate you being here today and being with us. As Megan mentioned, my name is Matthew Mielcarek. I am the SVP of Insights at Pursuant. And what that means is that I work with clients like you who use data and technology to bring the voice of the donors into creative and strategy development. So again, really happy to be here to share this content with you. And let's dive in. So I want to start our talk with a quote from a discussion we had with a Pursuant client. She told us recently that our challenge as marketers is to connect people with our mission through messaging and content that is most relevant and drives action. In 2020 and 2021, we scaled up proven strategies that performed very well and helped offset revenue declines from other programs that struggled through the impact of the pandemic. Since then, however, donor behavior has changed. Everything costs more for everyone, and we all feel the weight of uncertainty in the world. That was Catherine Holohan, Vice President of Direct Marketing at American Cancer Society. And I love this quote, and I wanted to lead with this quote because I think what she conveyed feels so universal for this society and fraternity of fundraisers that we all are. We all know and can feel that donor behavior is changing. We just don't know how much or how. We know that the world has changed and there is more uncertainty within the strategies that we're setting for our organization. So the big takeaway from Catherine as I read this is really also that we're all in this together. We all very much feel what she has conveyed in this quote to us. So this brings us to today. Let's explore some of the themes that Catherine talked about. And what we'll focus on is really three areas. We want to give you a sense of the fundraising environment that we're operating in. As Megan mentioned, we are a fundraising agency, so we're having daily conversations with our clients about the headwinds, the tailwinds that are facing us, and how we should react and how we should respond. So we're having those conversations, want to bring them forth to you. Then we're also going to talk about how to find growth, particularly in uncertain times. I think it's not an understatement to say we don't know what is ahead. And then lastly, we will close out and leave you with tools for becoming your donor's charity of choice. So let's talk about the landscape that we are all operating in. This webinar is an annual event, and so if you are a repeat customer, thank you and welcome back. We host it around this time every year as folks are wrapping up summer vacations or heading back to school, but at the same time, in many cases, fundraisers are talking about their 2023 strategies or should be talking about them. And so I wanted to do a quick flashback to something that we shared last year. We shared this slide that America is on the verge of a post-pandemic boom. And it felt so right at the time. Last year, we were ready to party. The infrastructure agreement was on its way to being passed. The jobs market had month after month of continuous growth. Consumer spending was way up, way up. And then the reality is that we did have a post-pandemic boom with the economy growing faster than it had in nearly 40 years. But we all know what happened. The spending spun out of control, prices rose for a variety of factors, including the war. Inflation and interest rate increases kind of put an end to the party and really increased anxiety and uncertainty around the world. And so we don't know how long interest rate increases are going to last or what impact they will have on the economy. And we're currently, in a complex and uncertain situation. What I'd like to dwell on for just a bit is the impact that inflation has on discretionary spending. We know that inflation often has its biggest impact there on spending that isn't mandatory. And so I wanted to explore that just a bit. What we know today, quite plainly, is that $1,000 from last year equates to only $917 today. So that's $83 in discretionary spending that I don't have to spend this year. And so really in every area of the economy, consumers are rattled. They are taking a closer look at how their finances are managed, how prepared their nest eggs are for a downturn, and really how they're spending in general. And so the big question for all of us is what gets cut and how do we make sure that we're not on that list? I found the survey data and I find it to be really interesting about where consumers say they'll cut back. And what leads there at the very top of this list is dining out and entertainment. Travel's way high up there as well. So you can really think of those and term those for many consumers as the most discretionary items. I would say I've read recent reports about this past year that a lot of rebound traveling is occurring. And so certainly people had the itch after lockdown to get out. I've also read that restaurants are doing pretty well. So perhaps supply chain issues at grocery stores are making restaurants more attractive. At the bottom, in the green area, our pets are the priority. So people are less likely to cut spending on pets when discretionary spending declines. Our dogs always eat first. We see that alcohol and spirits are also more essential down there, along with beauty and personal care. And for many folks, they may prioritize those in different ways. If you scan the whole list, you'll see nonprofits aren't on there. But really important, the needs of your customers, your services beneficiaries are essential, and perhaps more so during tough economic times. And so support of your organization must be a priority. And so the question that we ask ourselves a lot at Pursuant as we are defining strategies on behalf of our customers is, how do we show our donors that we are essential? And so I think that that is one of the big questions that we will seek to answer today, regardless of the direction that the economy turns in the months ahead. We believe that these strategies will help us to stay top of mind and remain a vital part of our customers and nonprofit supporters' philanthropic spending. So the way that we answer that is by becoming what we call their charity of choice. And I'm going to illustrate that in a few ways. The first way is to think about the experience of truly connecting with a donor with a direct mail piece. A lot of you who are in direct mail production know what a grind it is, what it feels like to get mail out. But I want to talk about the other end of that, when we are truly connecting with a recipient or with a donor. So think of each step. A letter is received in a postal mailbox. An individual might see the letter. They might review the envelope, choose to throw it away or open it. But if they open it and they take that next step with us, that letter is read. And if we did our job with copy and creative and offer, a true connection is really made. That donor feels grateful to be part of your organization, and we become their charity of choice when we are welcomed back again and again. So they're going to open that next letter or envelope. They're going to read that next email that they receive from us. And they're actually going to feel something for being part of our organization, our mission, for making an impact and supporting us in one way or another. Another way that we will know that we have become their charity of choice is quite simply when times are tough and you're not overlooked. So again, we know that in periods of uncertainty, donors still give quite generously, but might pull back from the number of organizations that they support. And so being that charity of choice ensures that you're not forgotten. We also know that we have become their charity of choice when you receive a second year gift from your donor. And specifically, what we mean by that is we know that a ton of new donors never give again. I think it's in the neighborhood of an average of 20% of new donors never give to the same organization again. Overall retention's a little better, but still painful at 40%. And so if a donor chooses to give to you that second year again, you have remained on their list of charity of choices. You could think many of you likely had pandemic donors as well. And so the big question was, how long do they hang on? And will they remain a charity of choice? Will we remain a charity of choice for them with that initial first gift, or will they move on and quite simply give somewhere else? So becoming their charity of choice means you are essential to donors. And when you are essential to donors, you'll be building resiliency within your donor file. So having more donors giving year after year as multi-year donors, you will open the door to relationship development. And so what we mean by that is quite simply upgrades and lifetime value. Also engaging with your organization outside of philanthropy as a volunteer, as a fundraiser, as an advocate as well. We also know that if you're able to become their charity of choice, quite simply, you'll be driving growth at your organization. And so that's really the big concept here of what we're striving to do, how we're striving to position ourselves in the year ahead. And we'll share what those tactics look like up ahead.
Oh, thanks, Matthew. This is really fascinating already. It's a good look back and good reminders. We did have one question come in, if you're ready for it. Inflation impact on spending doesn't even mention philanthropic spending. Do people view their giving as not a part of their expense budget or as a separate item that doesn't compete with their discretionary spending?
Oh gosh, I love that question so much. Where I'd have to respond is quite simply first with the outright component of how much do they have to spend, and so I think that that's important. We're talking about all along discretionary spending, which is money that you have the ability to designate in one way or another. But I could go even further towards tithing, for instance, in the faith-based community, and where many individuals might commit to giving 10% of their income. And so in that sense, which might be extreme, I don't even think that that's discretionary if you're outright tithing at 10%. Again, an extreme example applicable only to quite a few folks. So I do think it is a blurry line, and it has a lot to do with motivation and philanthropic habits and behavior. I would say I'll get into a little bit more of that in what some of those differences are between different types of donors up ahead.
Great. Well, thank you for diving into that. And I think many of us feel the same way, their own relationship with nonprofits.
Yeah.
In general, the nonprofit industry is very unique with its willingness to share information. So I'd like to take a moment to thank some of the partners and leaders across the industry who have shared their reports and their thought leadership, all in the spirit of advancing this greater good. The Pursuant Giving Outlook really highlights many of the best resources of nonprofit benchmark data. For example, Giving USA report from the Giving Institute that helps us improve our overall fundraising, direct response, online programs, and with insights by vertical, along with perspectives on growth and innovation. Our goal is really to help empower leaders, you guys, with this information and tools and resources so you can do your best for your organization and respond to the environment today. And that's why we're just really excited to present these ideas to you. Matthew, are you ready to bring us home?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks so much, Megan. Download the report. I hope you'll find more within that if we're only touching on some of the topics that are most interest to you. But I wanted to get back to how philanthropy is changing. So we talked about about inflation and the dramatic impact on consumer spending. And I also want to share where we are today, which I think we all agree is a really weird place. It's just so very weird because so many of the signals that we have received are mixed. So inflation has cooled. That's good news, but it's still very high. We know that unemployment remains very low, so the jobs market is in a positive place, but job growth is cooling. And so we've heard a lot, especially across the tech sector, about what might be on the horizon. Consumer spending and retail sales are up and continue to remain really strong. But at the same time, we know that home sales are falling, and we don't know just how much. And then if you plugged into the news this morning, I heard news that dropped that the Federal Reserve is likely to increase rates by 0.75 of a point for the third consecutive time in a row. So very mixed signals. And what I would say is less certain and less mixed if we're looking back is that 2021 to continue to be a very philanthropic year for us. So what you're seeing here and what you'll see on the next couple of slides is data from Giving USA. It is 9 months old at this point, but it is also entirely comprehensive for last year. And so we wanted to delve into last year's performance to put some framing around what we're talking about today. So we saw growth in 2021, and it was tremendous because the philanthropic space remains huge. It was 4%, but it's really important to note it was muted. because of inflation. And as we look back, that growth was effectively flat. If we look, for instance, at category giving and individual categories of giving, we saw a lot of flatness as well. So foundation giving declined by 1%, corporations fell 18%, and that is very much a pandemic swing of corporations coming out in 2020 and giving, and then pulling back some in 2021. And then individual giving declined by 1 percentage point. So really flat there as well. I'd say that individual giving continues to remain the lion's share of overall philanthropic giving. I think it's in the neighborhood of 65%, maybe 68%. But it is declining over time as foundations and corporations grow in terms of their participation in philanthropy. And so broadly, we do see that individual giving is a declining share of the overall philanthropic landscape. I wanted to close this out by looking at channel giving. And so we saw online giving grow by a meager 3%. The reason that we say that that's meager is because it usually grows in the neighborhood of 10 to 15%, sometimes 20% within a single year. And again, this is COVID rebound because 2020 grew so dramatically and so much. So this is just a little bit of adjustment. My guess is that online giving in the year ahead returns to the norm of 10 to 15%. So we know that, and we're not as surprised that there's so much migration and movement to digital channels. One of the biggest headlines from last year, for so many reasons, is that monthly online giving revenue grew by 24%. So if you look at overall online revenue growth and then monthly online giving, that really is a headline. People are very comfortable making online monthly gifts, making those sustained gifts. They are comfortable subscribing, whether it is to Hulu or your gym membership. Setting something up and stepping away for it is becoming increasingly comfortable and a way for individuals who want to make a big impact but can't within a single payment do so. And I'd say technology advances like mobile payments really have a lot to do with that as well. So some big headlines across the space. I want to continue with that Giving USA data and drill down into unique sectors just a bit. And so find yourself within this, ask yourself how your program performed within last year. I would say arts, culture, and humanities saw tremendous and significant gains. So really all of the sectors you're seeing here are the effects of a pandemic rebound in many cases. So in the case of arts, it suffered perhaps the most in 2020. And now we're really seeing it roar back really to its trend line, fortunately, in 2021. Public society benefit, that includes organizations like the United Way and ACLU. It's a bit of a weird one within the Giving USA data because any gift to donor advised funds are counted within this sector. So when a gift is made to that investment fund, this category, public society benefit, is really the general catch-all. And then if you know how DAFs work, the gift really is held, it grows or declines in value based on how investments are made. And really, the nonprofits don't receive it until a designee is named. But the way that Giving USA accounts for that is in this category. And so as DAF growth grows, we have perhaps seen some real impacts within that category. And then over at the right, looking at declines in 2021, not that dramatic. The decline on education is likely, again, from COVID rebound giving. And I think that there were many gifts in prior years, in 2020, to medical research related to education or improved patient care, delivery of care, or otherwise. So heading into the fall, we wanted to try to share the most recent perspective of how philanthropy and fundraising is being impacted by the recession. So the best way we did that and can do that is by including and referencing the Pursuant client performance. So we have access to that data right now. And so we can share those results with you right now. So broadly, we're seeing decreases in direct mail appeal response rates. So this isn't a recent cliff, however, that response rates have fallen from, but it's a trend that we're seeing over 12 months before inflation grew substantially. So it's not the direction that we want to see them trending, but we don't believe, at least immediately, that those decreases are inflation induced. Additionally, we're seeing increases in average gift over 12 months. So similar to the first long-term trend, we're seeing fewer donors giving more. I've read outside research that suggests right now the very lowest and the highest dollar donors have pulled back a bit, maybe for different reasons. But I find both of these first two trends to be really interesting because they're not necessarily related to the economy, but instead they are more related to broader philanthropic industry trends that actually existed before the pandemic started. Fewer donors giving more dollars, and response rates declining over time. Over at the right, we see that retention is slipping down by 10% from last year. So that's pretty substantial. What we think is occurring, though, is that pandemic donor churn is finally shaking out a bit more. And so we're seeing some of those donors that gave in the pandemic who held on for a while finally rolling off. So quite simply, committed donors who are on our file are sticking around and giving more. That's why it's important that we become their charity of choice. While those who are less committed, who may know us less, are rolling off of our files, and they're doing so in a way that aligns to a lot of the phenomenal pandemic giving that we saw a couple of years ago. So the net here is that we're seeing softness. We should be concerned about it, but we have yet to fall off a cliff of consumer spending for philanthropy in one way or another.
And Matthew, we just got one quick question on this
Okay.
slide.
Sure.
For the direct mail appeal response rates, does that include email too, or are you just referring to direct mail through packages? And
Yeah, that is actually just direct mail alone. So that one is specifically looking at our direct mail response rates.
Great, thank you.
Sure. All right, so let's shift just a bit. And now I want to turn from the environment to finding growth in the year ahead. So how should we respond to the uncertainty and find favor with our donors? Remember in that quote that I mentioned up front that we shared that everything is different now and donors are changing. And so what we wanted to do is share with you 4 areas of growth that we would recommend that strategic plans should focus on in the next 12 months. We've selected these tactics because we believe that they are outperformers and that they are meeting the unique and changing needs of our donors, and they represent growth. So we're going to step through each one of these. There's a little bit of rationale with each of them. And we want to share where we will be advising our clients to move in the months ahead. So the first area is that mid-level and major giving retake center stage. So we know that the needs of the pandemic drove a historic number of donors to give in 2020 and in 2021. But again, that was a blip in the long-term trend of donor declines that the nonprofit industry is facing. So we know that fewer donors are giving more each year, and it's vital that organizations offer a case for support for mid-level and major giving, and that fundraisers have tools to identify individuals who have the capacity and desire to support at these levels. I mentioned recurring giving and sustainer giving on a couple slides back. And many organizations might even consider that mid-level giving when you look at the cumulative amount of gifts given. So we find really this to be an important bridge within philanthropic programs, not just for the year ahead, but really based on where the space is headed. The next area is that donor bases will continue to diversify. And so at Pursuant, we work with a lot of organizations that are seeking to diversify their donor bases. But when they tell us that, we have to ask them, what do they mean? There are quite a few strategic reasons why organizations can find growth here. But the first place we go or would explore is, how do you describe a traditional donor? How would you classify or identify them? And are you satisfied with the reach that this group is giving you? And what we mean by that is we look at a lot of donor files. And so certainly some files are older than others. And an organization that we're working with may only be able to reach them through direct mail. So that's great for today. But if that population isn't growing, we certainly have a problem up ahead. I would also add, we work with a lot of organizations whose traditional donors or mindset may no longer align with the direction that the organization is headed. So the organization might be straddling growth strategies versus their foundation or origin in one way or another. The traditional donor has helped them to keep the lights on, but isn't necessarily in a position to help them grow. And perhaps there aren't many of them left or out there for us to pursue or explore. So the question there is, can that population grow? Do you know how to find them? And if the answer is no, then we need to explore new audiences. Then we need to certainly diversify. And so what that means in many of our strategies is certainly acquiring younger donors. So reaching out to individuals to smooth out that age curve that we might have with individuals. And we know that may often involve approaching them in different channels. And then certainly this means reaching a more ethnically diverse audience. And so we work with clients to look at demographic trends over time. And these are very long-term, but we can show what a typical donor universe looks like and how that might change as the demographics of the US change over time. And also what the appeal and potential might mean if we tapped specific audiences. And so that's why this strategy of diversification is important. And we know that it's clear, regardless of which approach you might choose, that growth can come from an expanded view of who your supporters might be. The next area of our outperformer is that direct mail is going to be smarter. So we feel your pain. What a year. We know that paper and postage price increases and longer production times are unlikely to subside in the months ahead. I hope many of you are already thinking about end of year. We know that direct mail will need to become smarter as that cost equation continues to change. So by smarter, we mean better use of data analytics to require and identify and segment the most responsive donors. And personalization is going to play an increasingly important role. So we need to make the best possible impression and rely on tools like informed delivery and mail tracking to make that mail go further and generate additional impressions and awareness. I would say this goes somewhat hand in hand with those mid-level donor strategies, because if we use smarter direct mail that is more personalized, we'll have the ability to connect with those mid-level donors much more. So our last outperformer is that donors are demanding new ways to give. So while crypto may have currently lost some of its luster, the real headline here is that donors will continue to express their generosity and in new and unique ways. And so I think a really good example of that is back to online monthly giving. And really some of the drivers of why it's growing in recent years. We work with a lot of customers and we'll ask them about their recurring giving, their sustainer programs, and they'll say, we actually have two. We have a group of incredibly loyal supporters who have been mailing checks into us each month for about $12 for the past 15 or 20 years. And then we have a group that has joined online and has been giving $25 a month for us. And that's the group that is growing. And so what I find really interesting, if we drill down there, certainly there are going to be age and demographic differences on those types of individuals. At its core, people want to make a bigger difference. People want to stay connected to the organization. But technology has evolved to serve that younger audience, either through frictionless mobile payments or using mobile devices as well. So donors, and I would even say more broadly, consumers, are leveraging new technologies and new tools. And the net here is that we need to be responsive to what those needs are, so that they can choose to support us in the same way. I think that a whole webinar or case study could be written on the success and rise of donor advised funds, which have grown substantially and are making a big impact that I referred to earlier. So again, that is appealing to donors who are choosing to give in that manner. And so it's vital that we listen to donors to understand the ways that they may want to support your organization, the method that they want to use, and we want to get them as involved in the philanthropic process and give them the opportunity to do so. So I wanted to share an additional quote from another individual that we work with here at Pursuant. She says, our development and communications department works collaboratively to focus on stewardship and engagement to position the Houston SPCA as the charity of choice for our supporters. Communicating transparency has become the key to our success. During times of uncertainty or crisis, this back to basics approach helps us to identify solutions while meeting needs and strengthening relationships. So this is from Jamie Spiva, Senior Director of Leadership Giving at Houston SPCA. I love her focus here on stewardship and engagement. And when she talks about transparency, she's really talking about communicating the budget situation, the true and direct need that the organization might have operationally, and the license that their donors give them to be able to communicate in that manner. So we've talked about the current fundraising landscape. We've talked about some outperformer strategies that you should consider in your strategic plans. And so I'd like to close now on tools for focusing your stewardship and your engagement, very much like Jamie referred to on that previous slide, to position your organization as a donor's charity of choice. And so we've got 4 tactics for doing so that we wanted to share with you. The first is quite simply learning more about your supporters. Before you engage your donors, you have to know them. And as you plan ahead, you have to listen to them at scale. Pursuant has a solution called the GivingDNA platform. It's a fundraising intelligence tool that looks at real-time audiences in your database and prioritize those who are ready for a more meaningful relationship. This is super cool and a new feature that came out, and this really relates to one of the outperformer solutions I mentioned earlier. We use augmented intelligence. So when you upload or load a donor file that is your own data, we also append demographics along to that includes things like capacity, affluence, things like age, ethnicity, political affiliation as well. But what that's allowed us to do is to then segment and create unique audiences of potential supporters, similar to what I just talked to earlier. So we have a model, for instance, that will identify potential monthly donors on your file based on the frequency and the level of giving that they have given. And then similarly, this is the cool part, is we have a new model that helps us to identify individuals who are likely to have donor advised funds. I don't know exactly how it works, but I assume we have access to consumer data that talks about their comfort in investing. And so I love this approach because it starts to allow us to have conversations with our supporters about how they want to give to us and the unique ways that they can do so. With this tool, and again, as part of this tactic of fundraising intelligence, you should have the ability to explore your donors' motivation, so why they gave, their behavior, outside of departmental silos or the restricted fund that they gave to, and ultimately create segments or even website personas. So another tool is to explore the impact of improved relationships. And what I mean really here is scenario development. So looking at potential changes that you might have within your plan, and deciding what impact would an elevated experience have for your mid-level donors for your fundraising program next year. So what could that mean in terms of response rates, in terms of mid-level donors that we acquired? What would your donors benefit from a monthly giving program? This is a question that we're being asked quite often. What are the long-term implications if we ease up on direct mail acquisition to make this choice? And so balancing several options as we look at budgets and as we decide strategies ahead. So the recommendation here is to generate outlook scenarios for the future to explore potential areas of investment and growth for your organization and work through that scenario planning. This isn't always easy, especially if you're new to the role. And I would say feel free to ping us. We have projection calculators that are simplified tools that our analysts use that we can make available to you. That support data-driven decision-making. So you can answer this question of what would the implication be of repurposing acquisition or leaning into a monthly giving program. So from there, rebalance your program to meet your objectives. And so what we mean by that is make your changes, think boldly, make the tough decisions if you are making trade-offs. You've got those what if growth scenarios in your back pocket, so you can make the argument within your organization and compare and contrast those opportunities with your revenue and budget in mind. I would say our clients use these insights for their strategic decision making and assessing investment of current fundraising vehicles. And so the idea here is to make those choices, lean into them use data to argue for your position, to position your organization for growth. And then very lastly, I would say execute and reward your supporters. So, at this point, you're anchored by insights and your growth imperatives shift to execution. So, this means development and deployment of your strategies. This gets back to being welcomed by your constituents. They want to hear from us, both the need and the impact that we make. So as your donors hear the right messages from you, they'll welcome you, that letter from you in their mailbox or an email in their email inbox, and they will be more likely to open these communications and feel the impact of past support, and they'll strengthen their connection with your organization. So that's it. Thanks so much for joining. We hope these insights have been helpful and can be applied to your strategies in the year ahead. Let's be welcomed back by our donors again and again. Megan has a little more detail for you on next steps that you guys can take if you'd like access to any of the resources that we shared.
Thank you so much, Matthew. There were so many great insights in that presentation. I feel like I need to go back and watch it again just to absorb all of it. Before we move into the Q&A, I just want to remind everyone that both Pursuant and GivingDNA have strategies and solutions to help your nonprofit organization better understand its constituents and explore growth opportunities to better serve your mission, especially as we move into year end. So if you have time, take a quick moment, check out Pursuant.com or GivingDNA.com to learn more or to book a quick demo.
Thank you.
And also want everyone to have a heads up that the Pursuant Giving Outlook, the actual report, is going to be released early next week. So keep an eye on your inbox for the full report. Should be there. Looks like Tuesday, the 27th. And then moving into some Q&A. We have a few questions that have come in and just a few more minutes left. So Matthew, if you don't mind, the first question, you mentioned donor motivation in a few sections back. What do you mean by that? And what can the tool tell us?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And so specifically, we mean, why did an individual choose to give? All donors are not created equally. And as we look at a donor file, we have the ability beyond traditional things like RFM to segment our file. And so a really good example, I'm going to step out of the pandemic, but I would say we often find episodic donors who are giving in response to a tragedy or a very unique experience, give in a very different way that traditional mission-based supporters might be. So that's one example of motivation. Another is in the arts space, for instance. And so we know that many donors to in arts or even sports organizations give because they want access, they want tickets, they want good seats, in addition to supporting the cause. But that's a very different type of gift than a gift that is outright philanthropic, completely mission driven. And so I'd say that the continuum that we play with or play on is to ask, who are our most mission driven supporters? And we often work to try to prioritize engagement to those individuals, or at least customize messaging to them.
Of course. Great. Thank you for answering that. Another question that came in, do you have any insights as to why the health related sector is specifically seeing softening in average gift?
Yeah, so it may be related to Pursuant client data, so that it is a very limited subset and it doesn't necessarily reflect the entire industry. But our thinking is, again, it is that the COVID rebound, perhaps. And so, so we think that major donors may be pulling back a bit. And we know in the health related space that major giving is really a huge component of most of those programs. And so our hunch is that there may be some COVID-related fatigue, pulling back and waiting to see. But it could also be that that those donors are looking forward and being cautious. So it could be both examples of that.
That makes sense. Been a lot going on and a lot coming up ahead too. So it's important to be cautious.
Yeah.
Another question came in from David. During an election year, do you have data that shows how giving has declined, increased, or stayed the same?
Goodness, yes. It all depends on the type of election year, because I know certainly this is an election year as well. But we know that rage giving is a real thing, and that in particular for advocacy organizations, that giving increases during those years. So typically to advocacy related organizations, it certainly pops. We don't see necessarily that it's repurposed and that other organizations receive less. But that attention around political activities typically drives folks to give more.
Mm-hmm. Of course. I've always just been fascinated by rage giving. It's such a funny idea.
Yeah.
All right. Another question. What would you define as mid-level?
That's a good question. And it's totally up to your organization. And so, I would ask, where do you define major gifts? Where do your major donors, if you have any, typically hang or reside? And I think that it is very different and unique by sector or vertical. So the health-related organizations that we just talked about typically have very robust major giving programs. And so we might define mid-level as something in the neighborhood of $10,000 to $100,000 or $25,000. It depends if you're perhaps local or regional organization. For animal welfare, on the flip side, we might define mid-level as much lower. So in the neighborhood of $100 or $1,000, maybe to $10,000, sometimes even lower. So I would say that it's entirely relative on the sophistication of your program and where you have donors today.
Of course. Thank you. That makes sense. I think we have time for just one more question here, unless anyone has any other questions they want to ask. But we've been talking a lot about this at Pursuant in the last few weeks. Can you describe some examples of an elevated experience or experiences?
Yeah, I love talking about experience design so much, and especially around mid-level experience, et cetera. So, I think it starts with understanding what is the typical donor experience that an individual supporter or donor might have at your organization. And so the method or approach that we follow at Pursuant, it's my team, leads a journey mapping workshop or exercise where we look at all of the touch points that a supporter might have at your organization. So for arts organizations, for instance, it doesn't include just the direct mail, but we also want to know when marketing is reaching out, for instance, with a new, the annual catalog, or we want to know what the experience is like when an individual ticket holder calls to change his or her seat from where it was initially issued. So the first start is we would map out what a standard experience looks like. And then to get to Corey's question, how do we define an elevated experience is we create additional value and benefits from there. And so at its base level, an elevated experience to us is a beautiful direct mail piece that we can send or deliver to a potential mid-level or major donor. But it certainly extends much more broadly than that to the overall experience and relationship that that person has. And so I would say that it is integrated and multi-channel, that it often includes a phone call, and really, following Stewardship 101 to thank that individual or have a conversation with that individual. And it includes continuing to recognize that individual. For regional organizations or even national organizations, that experience also includes recognition events and community building activities to expose that individual to the community and to others. And I would say during the pandemic, a lot of that shifted to be limited Zoom calls or small scale Zoom calls to have discussions with individuals at the organization. So a mix of offers and benefits like that that really exceed what the standard experience might look like.
Those are some great examples. And I think we all can relate to those small, special touches. When you do receive that, you do feel pulled a little closer to the mission.
For sure.
Great. Well, those are all the questions that we have. I want to remind everyone that we do have a survey at the end of this webinar, so just hang on for 1 second and that should launch. But thank you for joining us for our annual Pursuant Giving Outlook, and thank you, Matthew, for sharing all these insights. This was really
For sure. Thank you, Megan, and thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate it.
All right. Have a great day.